Hello, fellow writers and fellow readers. It's been a tough 2 COVID years for people around the globe. Our economies have suffered in many ways, but among the worst affected sectors are the arts. And that said, Proverse needs to be complimented on their efforts to keep writing and publication alive and well. So, as I accept the Proverse Prize for the Finley Confession, I especially want to emphasise my gratitude to the publishing house for ensuring the work goes on despite a score of limitations and challenges. Without giving too much away, I, like most writers of fiction, am intrigued by the complex interplay of location, time, and people. By way of an introduction to the Finley Confession, I'll expand a little on all three. First, the location. The novel is set in the stunningly beautiful snowy mountains, affectionately known as the Snows, or sometimes as the High Country. 6 hours' drive inland from Sydney, they are part of the Great Dividing Range. Below the tree line, eucalypt and pine forests flourish. Above it, bold, dramatic granite tors and peaks redefine the intense blue of the Antipodean sky. For uncountable millennia, indigenous peoples arrived at the lower reaches of the mountains to feast on the annual arrival of an eclipse of boggon moths. In the 19th century, stockmen drove their herds up for summer grazing and helped to drive the First Nations people away. Then, time. The novel is set in the late 50s and early 60s, when the region was being transformed by the gargantuan engineering marvel, the Snowy Mountain Scheme. Sleepy rural backwaters and modest tiny towns became hives of activity as 16 dams, several new lakes, 9 hydroelectric power stations, and over 200 kilometres of aqueducts and tunnels were constructed. 100,000 immigrant workers arrived on the scheme, and the previously Anglo-Celtic monoculture found itself overnight very much multicultural. Central to the novel is the flooding of an old town by the scheme, the oncoming waters burying secrets on which the novel's plot relies. You couldn't wish for a more apt metaphor for the human subconscious. Buried secrets need and want to remain hidden, yet they insistently challenge themselves by what I call the universal Raskolnikovian thirst for confession. Third, the people. Being among the few teenagers in the town, 4 disparate young men find themselves thrown together, caught between the sleepy post-war community and the dramatic changes taking place. Initially, the 4 seem to represent 2 common Australian myths, mateship and the classless society. Ralph is the son of very wealthy pastoralists, the closest we can come to an aristocracy in Australia. His boarding school friend, the eccentric and creative Tim, is the son of Canberra academics. When they are in the Snows, they befriend 2 young men from the opposite end of the socio-economic scale. Noah, the son of the local impoverished garage owner, and the very enigmatic Jacker, an Aborigine who has just come back to the town to inhabit his recently deceased grandmother's shabby small holding. Poised on the edge of manhood, the four form complex relationships with each other, aspects of which they can neither understand nor articulate. Australian men simply don't have the language through which to articulate highly individual aspects of self-development and interpersonal relationships. This is one of the many reasons why men in Australia never really grow up. But if the four have trouble working themselves out and working out each other, problems are multiplied tenfold with the arrival of singer Cynthia Ross. Though decent and humble, and as far from a femme fatale as you can get, Cynthia unwittingly becomes the catalyst for a set of very dramatic changes. In producing this novel, which is my first, I have been fascinated by the way working in a narrative form differs from other kind of writing that I have done and published, such as working with a thesis or an essay or a poem. The end point of an essay has already been decided and is something one meticulously and logically works towards. The end point of a poem is as much dictated by the form at hand as the subject matter. But working with narrative, I have discovered that character shapes action, which in turn gives the novel its momentum and shapes its various conclusions. More than any other writing form, characters seem to take on a life of their own, completely independent of the author's plans and forecasts and so-called intentions. Character seems to decide what happens next. Writerly intention is trumped by the nature of the characters and the situations in which they find themselves. A novel, then, seems to take on a direction and personality all of its own, and at times the writer feels beside the point. Finally, why do I think you would find the Finley Confession worth reading? Well, if you like a set of mysteries, for most people in the world an exotic location, unique characters, some romance, contemporary themes, some humour and some lyricism, all of which I think this novel contains, then it might well be for you. I would be delighted to hear frank responses from any reader, both positive and constructively critical. Both will be more than welcome. In closing, finally, I would like to give especial thanks to the judges and founders for this award and prize.